Welcome to your deep dive on Zero Trust. You've provided some really interesting material on this, from technical overviews to the government's own cybersecurity strategy.
It's this hot topic.
It is. So for this deep dive, we've got two key documents. One's from SAGE, they specialize in this stuff, and the other's from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA.
They're the U.S. government cybersecurity pros.
Exactly. So you're interested in Zero Trust, right? Makes sense. It's the hot topic in cybersecurity these days, especially with, well, all the recent attacks on industrial systems.
Traditional security is like a castle and a moat. Once you're in, you're good. Zero trust is always verifying.
Okay, so no more free passes once you're past the firewall.
Right. It's about assuming breach, not just prevention.
Which is smart, because Zerda's document said attacks on those systems have gone up 2,000% in the past 2 years.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So both of these documents emphasize that zero trust is a journey, not like a destination.
I see, so you don't just implement Zero Trust and call it a day.
Right. It's about continually verifying users, devices, everything before granting access.
Okay, so how do you even begin to, make that shift? Where do you start? It feels kind of overwhelming.
CISA's Zero Trust Maturity Model breaks down Zero Trust implementation into 5 key pillars:
Okay.
identity, devices, networks, applications and workloads, and data. This model provides a roadmap for organizations to assess their current security and see where they can improve.
A roadmap. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not about flipping a switch, it's about following a path.
Exactly. They have 4 stages of maturity within each pillar: traditional, initial, advanced, and optimal.
So it's like climbing a mountain. You don't just teleport to the top. You start at base camp, that's your traditional stage, and gradually work your way up step by step. Each step gets you closer to that optimal summit.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to get a feel for this whole maturity model thing, but let's get specific. Let's say you're starting at the very beginning traditional stage. For identity, what does that actually look like in practice? And then how do you take those first steps to, a stronger posture?
Okay, so picture a company, they're still using just passwords for access. Maybe they have a local server, all their employee credentials are stored right there. That's your classic traditional stage for identity.
Which, like we were saying, is not exactly Fort Knox. Or
Yeah, it's like leaving the door wide open these days. So a good first step towards initial would be implementing multi-factor authentication.
the MFA.
Right, MFA. That extra layer of security, you need a code from your phone or email on top of your password.
Yeah, a lot of websites use that now. It can be a pain sometimes, but I get it.
It's not just about making it tougher for the bad guys, though. MFA is a fundamental shift in how you're verifying someone is who they say they are. You're not just relying on something they know, their password, but also something they have, like their phone.
You're connecting those dots between, who they are and what they can get to, right?
Exactly. And as you progress in the maturity model for identity, you see things like single sign-on get implemented.
That's SO.
Right, SSO. So you can use one set of credentials across multiple systems.
Oh, I use that at work.
Oh,
It's way easier than having to remember a million different passwords.
and it's not just about convenience. SSO, when it's implemented right, can actually make things more secure by reducing those entry points for attackers.
Makes sense. Fewer doors to try and break down.
Uh,
Okay, so we've talked about identity, but what about securing all those devices that are connecting to our networks? Because there are a lot.
Right, that's the devices pillar. And this is a big one, especially now with so much remote work and just the sheer number of devices that need to connect to company networks.
Because it's not just about who you are anymore, it's also about what you're using to connect to.
Absolutely. At the traditional stage for devices, organizations might have very little visibility into what devices are actually connecting. They might not have good device inventory or management practices in place.
So it's like anyone with a device can just connect. Yikes.
Pretty much. And as you can imagine, that's a huge risk. So a major step towards the initial stage is implementing basic device inventory and management, knowing what's on your network, who's using it, what software is installed, all of that.
Okay, so start keeping track. Makes sense. But how do you actually make sure those devices are secure?
That's where automated compliance monitoring comes in as you move toward advanced. You set specific security standards for devices that want to connect to your network. Maybe it's up-to-date antivirus or a certain operating system version. And you use automated tools to constantly scan those devices, make sure they're meeting the standards.
So it's not just a one-time check, it's constantly making sure they're in line.
You got it. And if something falls out of compliance, boom, it gets flagged, quarantined, or maybe even blocked from accessing sensitive stuff until it's fixed.
Okay, That's a pretty powerful way to make sure things are secure, and something that seems extra important for those industrial systems we talked about earlier, right?
Absolutely. Those environments often have older equipment that might not be patched or updated as often as IT systems, so strong device security is super important for protecting them.
Okay, so we've got identities, we've got devices. What about the networks themselves?
The networks pillar, it's all about controlling the flow of data across your network and preventing unauthorized access to, the important stuff. A traditional security setup relies heavily on perimeter security, firewalls, things like that. It's like building a big wall around your network and hoping for the best.
Right, the hard shell, soft center approach, we were talking about that earlier.
Exactly. And as we've seen time and time again, that's just not enough anymore. Attackers are getting smarter, they're finding ways to bypass those perimeter defenses.
So how do you adapt to that? How do you shore up the network itself?
That's where network segmentation comes in. As you move towards initial and advanced stages, instead of having one big network, you divide it into smaller, more secure zones.
You're creating compartments within the network.
Yes, and you control the flow of traffic between those compartments very carefully. So even if an attacker manages to get into one segment, they can't easily move around and access everything else, like those security doors in movies, limiting the damage.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also sounds like kind of a logistical nightmare to manage all those separate segments, especially as a network grows.
It can be. Which is why, as you move towards optimal for networks, you see organizations using things like software-defined networking, SDN. This lets you control and automate your network segmentation using software, which makes it way more agile and scalable.
So you're not manually reconfiguring your entire network every time something changes. You can do it all with a few clicks.
Exactly. And that agility is so important now. SDN also enables more advanced security measures like microsegmentation.
Microsegmentation, we hear that term a lot, but what makes it so micro?
Imagine being able to apply specific security policies, not just to different segments of your network, but down to individual applications or even data flows. That's the level of control we're talking about, like having a security checkpoint at the entrance of every room in your house.
Okay, now that's some next level security. Not just about keeping them out anymore. It's about controlling what they can do even if they slip past your defenses.
Exactly. That granular control is what Zero Trust is all about. But it's not just about networks. We also have to talk about securing the applications and workloads running on those networks, too.
Right, because if the applications themselves are vulnerable, then what's the point of a super secure network? It'd be like having, Fort Knox guarding a cardboard box.
Perfect analogy. That's exactly it. And it's why the applications and workloads pillar is so crucial. In a traditional setup, companies might treat application security like an afterthought. Secure the network, that's the priority, but the applications themselves, not so much.
So it's like having a really strong front door, but leaving all the windows open?
Yep. But as they shift towards Zero Trust, they start to integrate security into the entire application development process.
So baking it in from the beginning instead of trying to bolt it on after the fact.
Exactly. We call this DevSecOps, stands for Development, Security, and Operations.
DevSecOps.
Okay.
So it's not just about having a separate security team anymore. It's about making security everyone's responsibility throughout the development process.
That's it. And that's a huge change for a lot of organizations. It means developers are thinking about security from day one. Security teams are working hand in hand with developers, the whole 9 yards.
I bet that involves a lot of back and forth. Getting everyone on the same page about security can't be easy.
It's definitely a process, but the benefits are huge. By integrating security into development, organizations can catch and fix vulnerabilities much earlier, before they become a major problem.
Right, always better to catch these things early. So how does this DevSecOps thing actually work? What are we talking about here?
One important piece is continuous security testing. Instead of waiting until the very end of development to test for vulnerabilities, DevSecOps is all about ongoing testing throughout the entire process. This could be automated tools, scanning code, regular penetration tests, even running security checks as part of your CI/CD pipeline.
So constant feedback, security always on everyone's mind.
Exactly. And as organizations mature within applications and workloads, moving into the advanced and optimal stages, they start to implement even stronger security. Stuff like real-time threat detection and response built right into their applications.
So not just building secure apps, but apps that can defend themselves. That's wild.
Right. It's like this. In the past, if someone found a vulnerability in your application, they were in. Free access to your data, maybe even control of your systems. With real-time threat detection and response, though, your application can spot that suspicious activity as it's happening and take action to block it, or at least minimize the damage.
Now that's impressive.
Yeah.
It's like having a security guard posted up inside the application itself, watching for anything fishy. Okay, so we've done identities, devices, networks, even the applications themselves. But what about the data? That's what it all comes down to in the end, isn't it?
You got it. Data is the most valuable thing for most organizations, and it has to be protected accordingly. That's the data pillar of this whole model.
Makes sense, because if the data itself is vulnerable, then all the other stuff, the identities, the devices, it's almost irrelevant, right? Like locking your car but leaving the keys in the ignition.
That's a great way to put it, and unfortunately, that's what a lot of organizations are still doing when it comes to data security.
So if a lot of companies are leaving the keys in the ignition, metaphorically, what does good data security even look like in the zero trust world?
It's about shifting from a perimeter focus to a data focus.
Yeah.
Traditionally, you'd have all your sensitive data in one central spot, protected by a firewall.
Right.
Zero Trust is about protecting the data itself, wherever it is, whoever's accessing it.
Okay, so less about building walls around your data, more like attaching a bodyguard to each piece of information.
Exactly. And it starts with knowing what data you have, where it is, who can access it. That's often a challenge for organizations at that traditional stage. Might not even have a data inventory or clear data classification policies.
Right, if you don't know what you have, good luck protecting it.
Exactly. So moving towards that initial stage for data, a big step is implementing a data governance program. This means, creating that data inventory, classifying it by how sensitive it is, setting clear policies for data access, storage, sharing, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so you're imposing some order, making sure everyone's on the same page about what's important and how to handle it.
Right. And once you've got that foundation, you can get more granular with data security controls. Encryption, data loss prevention, DLP.
Okay, so encryption, that makes sense, kind of like putting your data in a lockbox. But DLP, data loss prevention, what's that all about?
DLP is about keeping that sensitive data from leaving your organization's control. Say you have a policy, no emailing customer credit card numbers outside the company.
Right.
A DLP solution can monitor outgoing emails, look for those credit card numbers, and if someone tries to send one, bam, it blocks the email.
That's slick, like a security guard checking all your outgoing mail for sensitive info.
Exactly. And DLP can be incredibly sophisticated. It can analyze data that's moving, data at rest, even data being used by applications, making it much tougher for that information to leak out, whether it's intentional or accidental.
That's reassuring, especially with all the data breaches happening these days. Feels like every other day there's a news story about a company losing millions of customer records.
That's why achieving mature data security is an ongoing thing. As you move towards the advanced and optimal stages for data, you're constantly evaluating new tech, new strategies to stay ahead of the bad guys.
It's like a never-ending arms race, isn't it? They figure out a new way to get in, you've got to find a new way to keep them out.
Exactly. Highlights why it's so crucial to have strong governance, strong visibility across all 5 of those pillars we've talked about: identity, devices, networks, applications, and workloads, and of course, data.
Okay, so big picture time. We've covered a ton of ground here.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that these other capabilities kind of tie everything together. What are those, and why are they important?
Right. Think of these as the glue that holds your zero trust strategy together. CISA calls them cross-cutting capabilities: visibility and analytics, automation and orchestration, and governance. Without these, even the best zero trust plan can fall apart.
Okay, I'm listening. Let's break those down. Visibility and analytics. What's that about?
Basically, it's about knowing what's going on in your network, being able to understand it. Early on in that traditional stage, organizations might have different security tools, but they're not connected, They're generating tons of alerts, logs, all really hard to manage and analyze effectively.
So you've got all this data, but you don't really know what it means.
Exactly, like having a puzzle but no picture to work from. That's where centralized logging and security information and event management, or SIEM, come in, especially as you move into those initial and advanced stages.
SIEM, so that's like hiring a master puzzle solver to take all that security data and make it make sense.
That's a great way to put it. SIEM solutions take data from all your security tools, connect the dots, and show you the patterns that might mean something bad is happening. That's the visibility you need.
And that visibility helps you respond to threats, right?
Exactly. Much easier to block an attack when you see it coming. And as you get closer to that optimal stage for visibility and analytics, you're not just reacting anymore, you're proactively hunting for threats.
Okay, so like you've got a security team that never sleeps, always looking for trouble. But I imagine that takes a lot of work, even with great tools like SIME.
It does, which is why automation and orchestration is so important for Zero Trust. This is all about using technology to automate those repetitive security tasks, make those complex security workflows more efficient.
Because, let's face it, in today's world, speed is key. You can't afford to have analysts manually going through alerts, setting up accounts. It's just not sustainable.
Right. So instead of an analyst having to check every single alert, you can use security automation and orchestration, SAO, to automatically gather more info, figure out how serious the threat is, even take action if it's needed.
That makes sense. But isn't there a risk in automating too much? What if something goes wrong and the system does something that actually makes things worse?
That's a fair point. Automation doesn't mean taking humans out of the equation completely. It's about finding that balance, automating what you can, but still having human oversight when it matters most.
Working smarter, not harder. Using automation for the heavy lifting, but keeping people involved for the big decisions.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to the last cross-cutting capability. Governance. This is all about having and enforcing security policies, procedures, controls, making sure your zero trust plan is aligned with your business goals, your risk tolerance, all of that.
So setting the ground rules for zero trust, making sure everyone's playing by them.
Yes. And it's more than just having those policies written down somewhere. It's about making sure people know them, understand them, and follow them across the entire organization.
Because a policy no one follows is useless.
Exactly. That's why strong leadership and a culture of security awareness are so essential for zero trust to really work.
It really sounds like zero trust maturity isn't just about the tech you use. It's about the people, the processes, the culture, all working together.
You got it. It's a complete transformation, changing how an organization approaches security at every level.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've learned so much about zero trust, from CISA's maturity model to those cross-cutting capabilities.
We've explored how zero trust isn't just about technology, it's a whole new way of thinking about security, especially in today's world.
It's about ditching that old castle and moat mindset and being more proactive about security, focusing on the data itself, and never just assuming trust.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race.
Start small, assess where you are, figure out what needs the most protection, and make a plan.
And don't get overwhelmed. Celebrate those small victories along the way.
And most importantly, build that culture of security awareness where everyone feels ownership.
Everyone's responsible for security, not just one team.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive on zero trust. We hope you're feeling empowered to think differently about security and take those first steps towards a safer and more secure future.
Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and stay safe.